High in the Himalayas, where icy peaks pierce the sky, lies a border that has been fiercely contested for over a century. This is the heart of the dispute between India and China, a vast and unforgiving landscape that became a battleground in 1962. The roots of the conflict are tangled, stretching back to the days of the British Raj and the ill-defined borders that were left behind. At the heart of the dispute are two main areas, Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. Aksai Chin, a high-altitude desert, is claimed by India as part of Ladakh but controlled by China as part of Xinjiang. Arunachal Pradesh, a mountainous region in the eastern Himalayas, is claimed by China as South Tibet but is an integral part of India. These competing claims, based on historical precedents and differing interpretations of maps, created a dangerous tinderbox. The McMahon Line, proposed by British Administrator Henry McMahon in 1914, sought to clarify the border between Tibet and India. However, this line was never formally accepted by China, setting the stage for future conflicts. After the Chinese Revolution in 1949 and India's independence in 1947, the two newly assertive nations inherited this complex and unresolved border dispute. The early years after independence saw attempts at diplomacy, with both sides proclaiming their desire for peaceful coexistence. However, the underlying tensions remained, fueled by differing ideologies, regional ambitions, and the legacy of colonialism. The stage was set for a confrontation that would have far-reaching consequences. The fragile peace in the Himalayas began to crumble in the late 1950s. China, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, embarked on an ambitious program of infrastructure development, including a strategic highway through the Aksai Chin region. This road, connecting Tibet to Xinjiang, was seen by India as a blatant violation of its territorial integrity.
India's response was a combination of diplomacy and military posturing. We sought to resolve the issue through dialogue, but also authorized the Indian Army to establish outposts along the disputed border.
This forward policy, as it came to be known, was intended to assert India's claim over the disputed territories. The forward policy, however, backfired. The establishment of Indian posts in close proximity to Chinese positions heightened tensions and created a volatile situation. Misunderstandings and skirmishes between border patrols became increasingly common, feeding a cycle of mistrust and hostility. By 1962, the situation had reached a boiling point. Both sides had reinforced their positions along the border, and the rhetoric had become increasingly bellicose. Nehru, facing domestic pressure to take a hard line, authorized the Indian Army to expel the Chinese from disputed areas. This decision, made with a flawed understanding of Chinese capabilities and intentions, would prove to be a grave miscalculation. The morning of October 20, 1962, shattered the uneasy calm of the Himalayas. Chinese forces, in a well-coordinated and overwhelming assault, attacked Indian positions along the disputed border. The initial attacks, focused on the Namkha Chu Valley in the east and the Chip-Chap River Valley in the west, caught Indian forces off guard. The Indian Army, ill-prepared for a full-scale conflict in the harsh terrain and unforgiving weather conditions, struggled to hold back the Chinese advance. The Chinese troops, battle-hardened from the Korean War and equipped for mountain warfare, made rapid gains, overrunning Indian posts and inflicting heavy casualties. The news of the Chinese offensive sent shockwaves through India. The government, caught unprepared for the scale and ferocity of the attack, scrambled to mobilize its forces. A sense of disbelief and anger swept the nation as the realization dawned that India was facing a formidable adversary. The initial Chinese offensive lasted for a week, during which they captured key positions along the border, inflicting heavy losses on the Indian Army. The speed and decisiveness of the Chinese attack exposed critical weaknesses in India's military preparedness and strategic thinking. The stage was set for a wider conflict that would test the resolve of both nations. In the eastern sector of the conflict, the Chinese launched a swift and decisive offensive aimed at capturing the strategically important town of Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh. Tawang, home to a historic monastery and a key administrative center, held both strategic and symbolic value. The Chinese attack, launched on October 23, caught the Indian defenders off guard. Outnumbered and outgunned, the Indian troops fought bravely, but were unable to withstand the Chinese onslaught. The fall of Tawang on October 24 dealt a major blow to Indian morale and demonstrated the effectiveness of the Chinese military machine. The capture of Tawang allowed the Chinese to advance further south, reaching the outskirts of the Assam Plains. However, instead of pressing their advantage and pushing deeper into Indian territory, the Chinese unexpectedly declared a unilateral ceasefire on November 21, 1962. The reasons behind China's decision to halt its advance remain a subject of debate among historians. Some argue that logistical challenges, the onset of winter, and international pressure played a role in the decision. Others contend that China had achieved its limited military objectives and sought to avoid a protracted conflict with India. Section 5. The Western Front, a stalemate and a ceasefire. While the fighting raged in the east, the western sector of the conflict witnessed a different dynamic. The desolate region of Ladakh, with its high-altitude deserts and treacherous mountain passes, became a battleground for control of Aksai Chin. Here, the Indian army, though initially taken aback by the Chinese offensive, put up a more determined resistance. The Battle of Rezang La, fought on November 18, 1962, became a testament to the courage and tenacity of the Indian soldiers. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Indian troops fought valiantly, inflicting heavy casualties on the advancing Chinese forces. However, despite isolated pockets of stiff resistance, the Chinese maintained the upper hand in the western sector as well. They captured key positions along the Aksai Chin salient, consolidating their control over the disputed territory. On November 21, 1962, as abruptly as it had begun, the war came to an end. China declared a unilateral ceasefire and began withdrawing its forces from the captured territories in the east. In the west, however, China retained control over the Aksai Chin region, effectively altering the status quo along the disputed border. Section 6. China's unexpected retreat. Analyzing the reasons. The sudden halt to China's advance and the subsequent withdrawal from captured territories in the east have been the subject of much speculation and analysis. Why did China, having achieved a decisive military victory, choose to declare a ceasefire and relinquish its gains?
Several factors likely contributed to China's decision. Logistically, the Chinese advance had stretched their supply lines thin, and the approaching winter threatened to make operations in the high Himalayas increasingly difficult. The harsh terrain and weather conditions posed significant challenges for both sides, but the Chinese, operating far from their bases of supply, were particularly vulnerable.
Internationally, China faced growing pressure to end the conflict. The United States, while not directly involved in the fighting, provided material support to India. The Soviet Union, despite its ideological affinity with China, adopted a neutral stance, urging both sides to seek a peaceful resolution.
It is also plausible that China had achieved its limited military objectives. The swift and decisive victory served as a humiliating blow to India's regional ambitions and demonstrated China's military might. The capture of Aksai Chin solidified China's control over the strategic highway linking Tibet to Xinjiang. Section 7. The war's bitter aftermath, India and China transformed. The 1962 war cast a long shadow over India and China, leaving an indelible mark on their domestic politics, foreign policies, and bilateral relations.
For India, the defeat was a national humiliation, exposing the shortcomings of its military and the flaws in its foreign policy. The war had a profound impact on India's psyche, shattering the nation's sense of invincibility and leading to a period of introspection and soul-searching.
The defeat led to a major overhaul of the Indian military, with increased defense spending and a renewed focus on training and equipment. Politically, the war led to the resignation of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and the rise of a new generation of leaders who were determined to restore India's military strength and international standing. The war also had a lasting impact on India's foreign policy, pushing it closer to the United States and its allies. For China, the war was a military triumph but a diplomatic setback. The swift victory showcased China's military capabilities, but also raised concerns among its neighbors about its growing assertiveness. The war further strained China's relations with the Soviet Union, contributing to the Sino-Soviet split. Section 8. The Long Shadow of 1962, a Legacy of Mistrust. The legacy of the 1962 war continues to cast a shadow over India-China relations. The border dispute remains unresolved, and the two countries have been locked in a tense standoff along the line of actual control, the de facto border, ever since. Despite several rounds of talks and confidence-building measures, the two sides have been unable to reach a mutually acceptable solution to the border issue. The lack of trust and the legacy of the 1962 war continue to hinder efforts to normalize relations.
In recent years, tensions along the line of actual control have escalated, with several incidents of border transgressions and military standoffs. The most serious confrontation in decades occurred in 2020, when troops from both sides clashed in the Galwan Valley, resulting in casualties on both sides.